What's up, PWT Universe? This is episode 2, live reaction to the Mr. McMahon documentary, episode 2, called Heat on Netflix. And before I get into it, I just want to point out that on social media, a lot of people are saying, oh, we didn't learn nothing and all of this. I just disagree. I think none of these people really watched it. I think everybody's clipping it, staring down at their phones. And you gotta remember, it's not for uber marks. If you watch this documentary and you're like, oh, it was boring, nothing new, you're just an uber mark. That's all it is. So me, I like to try and be a little more objective. I know I'm an uber mark, but I want to look at people's faces, see how they convey these things. Why? What pushes their buttons? Do they have any tells? These are things I like to look for and to look at. You guys know your boy Phil likes to psychoanalyze this stuff and break it down. And so thank you for joining me on episode 2. Let's get into it. So it opens, and you guys can probably hear in the background, we got Vince doing this live performance with Hogan on the guitar, and it's just utterly cringe. I don't know what the hell he was thinking, but he clearly loved and had a knack for performing. They talk about how wrestling's blowing up. Meltzer's here talking about it, and it got so popular, and they're in rinky-dink arenas, and now they're in big stadiums and stuff, and that's what we're seeing right now, another wrestling boom. So interesting. They talk about how Saturday night's main event was this combination of rock, comedy, wrestling. It went on when Saturday Night Live took a bit of a break, and oh my god, we're on network television. And Saturday night's main event coming back too, man. Getting me hyped. They talk about how in the late 80s you had to work hurt or else you weren't getting paid, which thank God that's changed. You know, Meltzer breaks down the guaranteed contracts. Working 7 days a week, 365. Pain pills, booze, on the road. You guys know the story. And then they get into how Jesse the Body Ventura tried to unionize pro wrestling. Let's see if we can extrapolate any new information from this. But again, we all know he tried to unionize. Hogan stooged him. He left. But now the Body's back with WWE. And they actually do say that and show Triple H running WWE now. And they're like, yeah, this is much different. The schedules are lighter. It's operated much smoother. And it's better on the guys. They're on guaranteed contracts, etc. Hogan admits to stooging. Vince is like, oh no, it was nothing, pal. They just, it was just something. He was trying to rah-rah speech, it was nothing, pal. He's like, no one would listen to Jesse. None of them would get behind Jesse. And so it seems like he's still holding a bit of a grudge. But then Atlas goes on to say, well, Vince pulled everyone in the office one by one. So they get into WrestleMania 2, how it was a disaster, the 3 cities. We know that story. Then he gets into how he's going to book WrestleMania 3. They just breeze through all the WrestleManias, and it's basically like, yeah, what am I gonna do, Andre Hogan? And they're gonna put this over. I'm starting to agree with the people on social media and disagree with myself at the start of this video, watching this episode. But yes, shout out The Princess Bride, which also gets highlighted here, because that was huge and is a wonderful movie. See, everyone glosses over this stuff. Like, Vince tells the story of how he approached Andre with doing the Hulk Hogan match at WrestleMania 3. Nobody's talking. Everyone wants to be like, oh man, can you believe that they talked about Chris Benoit? Here's what they said about Chris Benoit. Here's the thing, dude. This is how he pitched a match to Andre the Giant. He was on Princess Bride. We know some of the details. He needed a surgery. He got the surgery. He came back. Well, Vince came to him and was like, yeah, pal, I need you to draw the most seats ever. Get the surgery, come back, do one last run. And he did it, and he told him 93,000 seats. And Andre the Giant was like, oh, and he laughed at him. He scoffed at him, like, that won't happen. These are gems we don't get to hear about, and no one's talking about this. So he's like, yeah, you're gonna be a heel and take on Hulkster. And he goes, okay, okay, boss. They do a great job of highlighting how WrestleMania 2 wasn't as big of a spectacle. Like, commercially it did well and it made them money, but it wasn't as big of a spectacle as the first one. And so Vince got back to that with WrestleMania 3. He realized he owned in, he zeroed in on what he needed to do to take this thing to the absolute next level. And Meltzer's gonna come on here and go, no, actually, it was, 70,000, people, Tony Khan. Now, Vince McMahon, I don't know if he's keeping kayfabe or if he's being for realsies, but he's saying that Andre would not tell Hogan for a shoot if he would let him win that match. Of course, we all know the fake story. And again, people are glossing over this. This is supposed to be the Netflix Vince McMahon tell all, reveal everything. And he's keeping this alive. So whether that's a work or a shoot, shoot, who knows, brother? Andre took it to the grave, so we will never actually know. But Vince is saying, no, Andre wouldn't tell Hogan if he was going to win or lose, and I kept telling Hogan, don't worry, he'll let you win. Very interesting stuff for me, man. Believe it or not, man, it's a great story from Hulk Hogan. He's just like, I'm like, bro, Jack, what's going on? Am I winning? I don't know what's going to happen. And Andre goes, slam. And I go, what? And then as I'm saying what, he comes towards me and I scoop him and dupe him and drop the leg. And they're like, well, when did you know you were going to win? He's like, when Andre didn't kick out. Legend stuff, whether it's real or not. And it's hilarious because then Dave Meltzer comes in after and they play this quirky dum-dum music like he's a stupid guy. It's like, dum, 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 bum, 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 bum. And he's sitting there going, well, the truth is, this was just mythology, and Vince McMahon, and, actually, Hulk Hogan was a really big star, and, he's just such a putz. Yeah, and they still probably believe it's 93,000. It was actually like 73,000 in the building, yeah. But he sits there and shills AEW. Meltzer's such an idiot, and I'm glad they played this dummy-dumb, and maybe they did this to try and go at Vince, but ultimately, what are you going to get mad that a carny carnied? Are you going to get mad that a guy said that Andre was undefeated? They're trying to like clown him for that? No, Andre was actually slammed 25 times. But yeah, but who cares? We didn't know because there wasn't the internet. That's the thing. People look at the past and pretend like what they had Google back then. Everybody could see NXT back then. People in developmental, we know everyone's records. Oh, actually, Breaking Bad wasn't filmed in New Mexico for this one scene. So? It's just so silly. And luckily, this bald guy with the glasses, I completely forget his name. He's a writer, and he's featured in the documentary pretty prominently. And he says, you can't believe anything that anyone in the wrestling business says, and take anything they say as fact ever. That's exactly the point. Kayfabe. Kizarny, brother. Another thing nobody's pointing out in the IWC, and I'm overly bitter and too focused on it. But they're not talking about how Stephanie McMahon said, at first when I was young, I resented Hulk Hogan because my dad didn't get the credit he deserved. And then Atlas follows that up and says, yeah, everything Hulk Hogan said was directly coming from Vince's mouth. So again, very interesting things that should be noted. And she always talked about Andre the Giant was my best friend. And she resented Hogan, man. She wasn't a Hulkster. So there you go. And Hulk says every single thing Vince said and told me to do, I just did it. All of his ideas were gold. He said it, I did it. More compelling stuff here. Vince is worried. Oh man, I'm gonna lose Hulkster to Hollywood because this thing's blowing up and they're bigger than ever and they're riding this ride. They're riding the lightning bolt daddy. And Hulkster is like, I want to do movies. And Vince goes, oh, Hulk, I can't lose you. I'll do one with you. Let me do a movie with you then, so I don't lose you to Hollywood. So they're working together, brother. They make No Holds Barred. The movie flops, delays Hogan's time in Hollywood, and Bruce Pritchard and Vince start saying they see Hulkamania start to fade at WrestleMania 6. And they talk about Ultimate Warrior, and Hogan's like, look, man, his body was better than mine, his colors were brighter than mine, but behind all that shiny new toy, there was no go. He didn't love the business the way I love the business. And say what you will about Hulkster, but man, he lives the gimmick to this day. He loves pro wrestling, dude. If it wasn't for Hulkster, there wouldn't be an AEW or MLW or WWE or any of this stuff. He goes on to say that I did what Andre did for me. And I passed the torch. And it's hilarious because earlier Meltzer tries to come in and go, oh, no, Hogan was already a way bigger star. It wasn't a passing of the torch. It's like, yeah, dude, Ric Flair in the wrestling world probably wasn't as popular as Shawn Michaels when Shawn Michaels beat him at WrestleMania to retire him. But it was a passing of the torch moment, so to speak. There's different ways you pass the torch. It's not like biggest draw to biggest draw. It was like Andre was the biggest attraction. And yes, Hogan was already a bigger star, but that was the biggest attraction on the biggest stage going at the biggest show ever, saying, here you go, new biggest attraction ever. And that's what Hogan tried to do for Warrior. And Hogan says, he passed me the torch, Jack. And Meltzer's like, no, yeah, they try to paint it, Kenny Omega, like a passing of the torch moment, Will Ospreay. Man, shut up. You're an idiot. That's what the revisionist history is. If Hogan says that was a passing of the torch, that was a passing of the torch. It's so insane to me how these marks, and not film marks, the bad kind, try to rewrite pro wrestling history. So naturally, they talk about Sergeant Slaughter and how they had to pivot away from Ultimate Warrior, who wasn't as big of a draw as Hulk and wasn't popular backstage and wasn't as good as a wrestler, and how they built to the Hogan-Slaughter feud. We all know. If there's anything important, I'll talk about it. Now, they didn't talk about just how popular Sergeant Slaughter really was. Like, dude was so popular. To turn him heel was a big deal. He was getting threats to his home, to his wife, and stuff like that after, becoming this sympathizer, Iranian sympathizer. We all know the story, but the episode's titled Heat, and yeah, this was one of the hottest angles for sure in the history of wrestling. A young Macaulay Culkin was in the crowd to see Hogan beat Slaughter, and Donald Trump as well. I was there. It was huge. It was the hugest match ever. Where's my shoes? So of course they talk about how Hulk Hogan came back, and everyone wasn't like, oh, thank God Hulk's back. It was kind of like, Hulk's back, great, but we're kind of tired of it. Plus the steroid stuff started happening, and the steroid trial happens, and so they need to pivot away from big, giant, muscly dudes to like the Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. We all know the story. And so they basically blame this physician, this doctor, I forget his name, even though they've said it 400 times. They talk about how he was pulling up and he was a physician appointed by the government to make sure that they're following the athletic commission guidelines in each state they go to, right? Which makes sense. And Vince is like, I can't choose who the government appoints me. But this guy pulled up and was like, hey, I got painkillers, sleeping pills, steroids. And he just set up shop and started prescribing and selling steroids and all these different things to all the different athletes. And it's a shoot for sure. It's the truth, because even Bret Hart is like, yeah, that's what happened. The guy set up and here's your physical. Do you need anything else? Or you'd be like, hey, I need a little something extra for this, and he'd get it done for you. And that seems more likely. If you're being Batman, I always say be Batman, look at these things objectively. That seems more likely what happened than Vince was behind also dealing the boys drugs, But that being said, did he turn a blind eye to it? Absolutely. And then Vince just launched the WBF and they're snooping around for steroids. What a fucking idiot. It cuts to a great shot of Vince being like, when you see this logo, WWF, I can assure you that you're watching drug-free entertainment that you and your family could enjoy. And then they're like, cut. And then he looks off camera and he just makes a snarling grill face like, oh, fuck this. So funny. And then Vince, though, give him credit. He holds a press conference and he's like, dude, I took steroids. I don't anymore. I have in the past, but we're going to make sure we clean the WWF up. And Vince told Hulk Hogan, don't go on Arsenio, and it's a bad idea. So again, no one's talking about this. Like, Vince told this dumbass, Hulk Hogan, don't go on Arsenio. He went on Arsenio, and he said, I don't use steroids, whatever. And McMahon was like, dude, you should just come clean like I did. The same day, Hulk goes and lies through his teeth, looks down the barrel of the camera, can never trust this man again. And then Hogan's like, well, you know something, Jack? I self-destructed myself. You know something, dude, when you self-destruct yourself, Jack. That's literally what he said. I self-destructed myself. I don't know, guys, but then a bunch of wrestlers, Dr. D. David Schultz, Superstar Billy Graham, and a handful of other people are like, dude, I personally injected Hulk Hogan with steroids more than 3 times. So what do you mean he's only done steroids 3 times and doesn't do it now? Even McMahon now is like, oh, pal, I told him. What an idiot. Just tell the truth. So then they get into Phil Mushnick and how he's like, dude, wrestling, and they interview Mushnick for the, not in retrospect, like for this documentary, and Mushnick's like, yeah, wrestling was so hard to ignore, it was so popular, I had to start writing about it. And then Vince says, dude, to this day, Mushnick has a problem with me, our business, what we do, my company. And they're like, why do you hate Vince? And he's just like, because he's a dick. And so Mushnick reveals that it's revealed to him by a bunch of wrestlers and people who've worked in the business who reach out to him and are like, man, you don't know the half of it, wrestling's a dirty, seedy. Tony Atlas is like, man, we would be considered the worst people walking the face of the planet today if people knew what we were doing. He's like, we all abused women, all of us. They were like toys to us. We kind of know this stuff, but just to finally hear people flat out admit it and not say it in a shoot, or like, oh, it's Sean Oliver with a shoot interview and we got a question. How big is Batista's dick? Who have you slept with? Sonny's a hoe. Not in that fashion. Like a dude being like, no, dude, we completely abused women and did crazy shit that people would not accept today. All of us. And then they bring up Jimmy Superfly Snuka in 1983 when he's the most popular wrestler in the world and a fall happens where his girlfriend dies. And we find out later in life that he more than likely did that, or allegedly, or whatever. I'm not actually sure about all of that, but he has dementia now or something. Dave Meltzer comes on here and spews out out nonsense propaganda for 4 minutes going, oh, yeah, did Vince have a hand in it? I mean, I think he had a hand in it going away. I think he probably did. It's like, I hope you get sued for defamation. I guess it's a documentary, so you can't really do that, but just an absolute crazy assertion by Dave Meltzer. Yeah, nobody backed Dave up on that, and he ends up by going, but I think he did, but I don't know. So what an idiot. And then also, Meltzer says, yeah, Mushnick called me and told me directly, oh, I have this story, and once it drops, they're going to have to close the doors completely. So stooges stooging to other stooges. Hilarious. But yeah, this scandal is a juicy one, and it's crazy. Bret Hart goes, yo, this one announcer was a known PDF file. He would just fire ring boys if they didn't comply. And the ring boy scandal, for those of you who don't know, they'd hire a bunch of ring boys, teen boys, young boys to help set up the ring, etc., and apparently all of the top WWE, WWF executives were making passes and moves on them and abusing them and stuff, which is horrifying if true. And as time goes on, man, it seems like there was likely more of this going on than people are willing to admit, Yeah, and Mushnick makes a great point. He's like, dude, this was a ring. This was a PDF file ring. There's 3 guys who are in power. Pat Patterson, named flat out by people right there on the news, and, they break down how he was an openly gay man, etc. But this Mushnick guy is like, either Vince was aiding and abetting it, or it's rank neglect at best, So Meltzer full on admits that Vince McMahon told him on the phone, one of the 3 guys is innocent for sure, and that's Pat Patterson, and it's a gay witch hunt, and they're gonna come after Pat, and I gotta protect him because he's innocent. Dave is saying that flat out, which is pretty crazy. And then Bruce Pritchard goes, I don't believe anything against Pat Patterson. He's like, and there's nothing that's ever been substantiated against him. He's like, the other 2, no comment. So they just threw them boys under the bus, dude. Crazy, man. And then Tony Atlas comes on and is like, we all knew Pat was doing this shit, and I didn't like him because he kept grabbing my pecker in the locker room. Which I don't mean to laugh at, but it's just funny how he called it his pecker. And then they ask, well, what did you do? Who'd you tell? And then Tony Atlas bursts out laughing, and he's like, to who? And then they're like, well, Vince. And he's like, you don't know nothing about the wrestling business, boy. You either take it or you leave and go home. He's like, they need poor Pat Patterson more than they need me. Then Meltzer goes on to describe how Pat Patterson was Vince's right-hand man, especially for creative and booking ideas. And they assert that Vince would do anything to protect Pat Patterson, which seems likely. But Atlas also says, I don't think it's even Pat. I just think he'd do anything to protect his business, even if that was at the expense of Pat, is what I think Atlas is sort of implying. And again, man, you gotta give it to Vince. Matt Morgan came on the PWT live show and said, Vince is sort of an insecure guy. And maybe he is, he would know better than I. However, you see moments like this and Vince says it on camera. He's like, well, I never shy away from confrontation, especially if someone's lying. I love to confront things head on. I welcome it going on the Donahue show and all this stuff. So you gotta give him credit for that too. People like him and Dana White, they're the 2 most successful promoters ever. And they don't shy away from bullshit. They do try and shy away from some bullshit, and they do try and control the narrative as far as their business is concerned. But, Dana White slapped his wife publicly not long ago, and everyone forgot because he just addressed it head on and was like, I'm ashamed, and that's never happened, and I'm not worried about you guys, I'm worried about my family. Vince, he's willing to just fight for his business and his family, which you gotta commend that, Yeah, so Vince got destroyed on this show, and, superstar Billy Graham, who's in the WWE games, mind you, so he confronted Vince, was like, you're a liar. Bruno Sammartino, who's in the games now in the Hall of Fame, you're a liar, right to Vince's face. Geeky ass Meltzer's sitting there next to Vince, just looking like a schlub. It's fascinating to say the least, but Vince got destroyed. It just goes to show you that Triple H is trying to move forward, and he's helped mend those bridges while Vince was around. We're gonna see more of those bridges mended the further Vince is away from the company. And then they get into the Rita Marie, the female referee, and Meltzer's like, well, of course we remember her because she was the only women's referee, which is true, at the time. And then he's like, it's clear that Vince was trying to push her as the hot, sexy blonde in his soap opera fantasy, like trying to paint it as this crazy thing. And I'm sure there was some of that, and they do highlight it in the doc, but it's just so funny how like Dave goes so hard on this stuff. So Vince admits, he's like, yeah, dude, it was consensual, and I did sleep with her. But he says, let's say it was a grape. The statute of limitations had run out. And he's like, so it's crap like that, pal. So he just had to throw that out there too. It's like, skeptical. So then Vince gets indicted. Phil Mushnick gets called out because he's an FBI informant. And Mushnick's like, yeah, I was an FBI informant. Because I'd write my stories, they'd read them, and then they'd act on them. So that's pretty funny. It's hilarious hearing Vince go, I wasn't guilty of anything. I wasn't gonna do anything they told me. I told them to fuck themselves. Funny hearing him talk like that. And it's funny hearing Dave Meltzer clown Vince McMahon for wearing his neck brace into his trial after he just had legitimate neck surgery. But he doesn't say shit about Tony Khan, who did his NFL Draft Day special wearing a neck brace, which to him was like his Vince McMahon wearing a neck brace moment. To him, in his mind, that's what that was. Meltzer doesn't have shit to say about that, and it was from a fake phony piledriver from the Young Bucks. Hilarious. And yeah, Hogan is like, I had to tell Vince I had to get out of there. I wasn't in control of the crowds anymore. They were kind of turning on me, brother, and I had to get out of there, and it was very hard to do. Which, what a pivotal moment in wrestling. And again, who knows if Vince and Hogan are working this kayfabe narrative together like they've been throughout this doc. So then they get into Ted Turner, Eric Bischoff, and WCW, and how they rose up and started overtaking WWE. We all know the story. So they tell the story about how Eric Bischoff got Hulk Hogan, and we all know it, but it's just cool hearing Vince's perspective where he's like, Hulk Hogan promised me, pal, I won't go work anywhere else, and I won't run against me or anything. I'll give you your release, do TVs and movies. He's like, and next thing you know, Hulkster's over there. So to Vince, in his mind, or at least what he's telling us, I let him go. Next thing you know, he's just over there doing WCW. Which, who knows, maybe that was calculated the whole time. Maybe Hulkster knew what he was doing. So Vince is like, dude, when Hulk went over there, of course, it broke my heart. Like, I built him up into this thing, and then he's over there. And then Shane O'Mac, and this isn't getting talked about enough either, Shane O'Mac says, him jumping over there was like a slap in the face. It was so taboo. He's like, even to this day, I think that was pretty taboo. Now, people want to theorize that Shane McMahon, because he was just seen on a plane with the Young Bucks, and he had that secret meeting with Tony Khan, that he's going to appear in AEW. Right there, do you think Shane O'Mac slaps his dad and his father's legacy in WWE and Triple H and Steph in the face like that? I don't think so, man. So Hulk Hogan says that the government told him if he didn't go and testify against Vince and say what they wanted him to hear, he would have got 17 years. Now, is that true or not? Who knows, but maybe we'll find out. And then Meltzer backs up Hogan. There you go. And Meltzer says, yeah, they had something on Hogan, and they wanted Vince really bad, and they basically were like, testify against him, and we won't get you for whatever we got you for. Speaking of wild times, Vince is like, dude, I believe in law of the jungle, pal. But he's like, dude, when you're weak, it comes from every angle. People are gonna pile on top. They cut you out of the tribe, or they leave you. Sacrifice down and out. And he's right about that, man. That is what was happening to him. Love him or hate him, it was coming from every angle. And if he had went down here, man, wrestling might not exist to this day. There'd be no PWT. And so the episode ends with graphics that read, in 94, Vince McMahon withdrew his defamation lawsuit against Rita Chatterton and Geraldo Rivera because he sued them for defamation. And then in 2023, during a temporary lift of the statute of limitations for alleged victims of sexual offenses in New York State, McMahon paid a multi-million-dollar settlement to Chatterton. So I don't know if a lot of people even know that, guys. Last year, 1 year ago, McMahon paid Chatterton multi-million-dollars not to bring that stuff up again. It's pretty wild. So my last thoughts on this episode is, again, it's just more stuff that as an Uber mark like myself, I already know basically all of this, but it's sort of a good refresher to not forget the past and how far WWE's come. Women were passed around and abused and A-worded and were basically objects according to some of these people. And you look now in their main eventing shows and all of that, and it's just really good to see how far pro wrestling's come in WWE in particular. They're a company with not a lot of controversy. I know the IWC likes to make up controversy, but obviously not as controversial as back then. And so far, I think if you're like a non-wrestling fan, this would be very compelling stuff. Or if you're like a casual or somebody who maybe fell off, I don't know if this is very much damning to WWE as they head into the Netflix era. And I would love if they asked Vince questions like, is it true you don't like people sneezing or whatever? Things like that. But yeah, I've been Phil Marks. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe, and make sure you check me out for part 3.